When you look at the figures we genuinely admire, I mean, whether it's a hero from history, a character in a great book, or, even someone in your own life, it seems like they're almost always defined not by what they gained, but by what they gave up.
Right. We instinctively gravitate toward those stories, the stories of sacrifice.
Totally. Just think about it for a second. We admire the person who decides to stay with a sick relative, right? They're giving up their own career path, maybe their personal freedom, for years and years.
Or you think about the colleague who loses out on a promotion because they spoke an uncomfortable truth.
Exactly. Or the entrepreneur who sticks to their principles, to absolute integrity, even when just a little bit of dishonesty would make them incredibly wealthy overnight.
In all of those stories, the real measure of a person, it seems, is taken when life is hard, not when it's easy.
It's when their principles come with a really hefty price tag. Okay, let's unpack this a bit. We have this profound, almost universal admiration for someone who pays a cost for their goodness. But this leads us straight into a really challenging and fascinating counter question, and it's at the heart of the sources we've looked at for today.
Which is,
What about the comfortable good person? Imagine someone who is just unfailingly kind. They always follow the rules, they never actively hurt anyone, but they live a life of such, perfect ease and wealth that their goodness never actually costs them anything.
so they never have to give up an opportunity or lose a dollar or even feel a moment of discomfort.
Not a thing. So can this person truly be considered morally good? Our deep dive mission today is to get into that core conflict. Can moral goodness exist without a cost, or is sacrifice an essential, maybe the defining test of character that separates, mere convenience from genuine virtue?
And that tension is really where philosophy meets reality, isn't it? As you said, this isn't just about simple definitions.
No.
This is a classic philosophical challenge. It connects our self-interest, what we all naturally want, with our moral duty, which is what our conscience or the world demands we ought to do.
And if morality is just a function of convenience, if it's only a byproduct of a comfortable life, then how do we know it's real? How do we know it's robust?
Right.
So the goal of this deep dive is to move beyond just judging actions, like did they do a good thing or a bad thing, and instead to really analyze the depth of the moral character underneath.
We want to know if that goodness is foundational.
Exactly. But before we can even begin to assess that cost, we have to be super clear. We're dealing with a really charged word here, sacrifice. We need to define the scope of what we actually mean when we use it in this, this deep moral context.
Okay, so let's nail down that definition of sacrifice first. Makes sense. If we're going to argue that goodness requires a cost, we have to agree on what currency that cost is paid in. According to the research we've looked at, the essential definition is pretty precise. Sacrifice is giving up something you find valuable. Your time, your comfort, money, opportunities, maybe even deeply held desires for the sake of something you believe is morally important. And it's that trade-off that's key, the giving up for the sake of.
Right. To make that tangible, we need to move past the abstract idea and look at the real-life struggle. So let's take the example of giving up comfort and sleep.
A classic.
It's Saturday morning, you're finally getting to sleep in, maybe till 10 or 11, something you truly value after a long week. But a friend needs your help to move a heavy sofa at 7 a.m. Yeah. If you get up, you forfeit that precious rest, you lose something valuable, your comfort, your recovery, all for the sake of friendship or duty. That specific transaction is a sacrifice.
And what's so fascinating there is how immediately that concept reframes the whole discussion. It moves it from just the action helping a friend to the internal value system.
How so?
Well, it's not about the amount of suffering that matters. It's the fact that sacrifice is, by its very nature, a test of priorities. It's that moment of conflict where your personal self-interested desires,
Like sleeping in.
like sleeping in or wanting more money or wanting people to like you, those things are measured directly and consciously against your moral values, like duty or compassion or honesty.
It's like a scale.
It's exactly like a scale. Think of it in terms of, let's say, moral currency. We're all wealthy in different ways. We have time, energy, money, status, reputation. When we sacrifice, we are intentionally spending one of those currencies for a moral good instead of spending it on ourselves.
That's a great way to put it. So telling an uncomfortable truth that might damage your image.
You're sacrificing your ego and your social security for the currency of integrity.
And that distinction between personal desires and moral values, that's absolutely key to understanding character, isn't it? Our sources really suggest that if you never have to make that choice, Your moral values are never truly expressed as a priority.
They're just expressed as a convenience.
Right. You don't have to choose between keeping the money and donating it if you have so much that donating it doesn't even feel like a loss.
Exactly. We only discover who a person is when they show us what they prioritize more than their own self-interest. That's why that moment of sacrifice is such a powerful indicator of depth.
It proves the moral value isn't just a nice belief to have.
It proves it's a foundational operative principle, one that can actually withstand pressure. I mean, if you're only honest because honesty is profitable for your business,
Your commitment is to profit.
your commitment is to profit, not to integrity. And the moment honesty becomes unprofitable, that untested virtue is going to buckle immediately.
Okay, but despite that, despite this understanding that conflict reveals character, there's still this deep, persistent, and frankly understandable hope that people have.
The alluring idea.
The alluring idea of goodness without pain. We all secretly wish we could be genuinely moral people without having to suffer or lose anything at all.
Of course. Who wouldn't want that?
We imagine this perfect world where doing the right thing always aligns with our own self-interest and always leads to good personal outcomes. And to be fair, sometimes that alignment is real.
It can be.
Being kind to your team at work might genuinely make you happier and, at the same time, create a better work environment. It's a win-win.
Or being honest, which might cause some short-term friction, but it builds long-term trust, which is hugely beneficial for you. Those are those positive, self-reinforcing alignments.
Right.
And this is where we run into a major philosophical distinction, the one that really separates ethical thinking into different camps. On one side, you have a school of thought that's sometimes called psychological egoism,
Okay.
which is the idea that all human action, even something that looks like sacrifice, is ultimately motivated by self-interest. You know, the pleasure you get from helping or avoiding the feeling of guilt.
So if that's true, then we never really sacrifice. We just pick the most rewarding kind of self-interest.
Exactly. And the goodness without pain ideal is built on that.
Mm-hmm.
If doing good always gives me the greatest personal reward, why would I ever need to suffer for it?
So the truly wise person, from that perspective, would be someone who's mastered their desires so completely that they only want what is moral. So there's never a conflict.
It's a very seductive picture, but it kind of bypasses the reality of duty and, genuine altruism. If we connect this to the bigger picture of the human condition, we have to admit the world isn't perfectly calibrated to reward virtue.
Not at all.
This is the challenge that thinkers like Kant would pose. He argued that an action only has real moral worth if it's done from duty, not just because it happens to align with duty or your self-interest.
So if you only help someone because it makes you feel good.
Kant would question the moral worth of that action, even if the outcome was good for the other person. The critical analysis our sources provide suggests that this ideal of perfect alignment, it just ignores the reality of injustice and scarcity in the world.
That's a big point.
If the world had unlimited resources and zero suffering, maybe we could have pain-free goodness. But in a world where integrity costs you a promotion, or where true compassion means you give up resources that are hard for you to replace.
Or where speaking truth to power puts you in actual danger.
Right. In that world, the ideal becomes a delusion.
So the ideal itself kind of serves a purpose then. It tests our commitment. If we believe a moral life must be pain-free, we risk prioritizing our own comfort
Your own psychological comfort and convenience.
over the actual messy and costly demands of morality in the real world. And that's what sets you up for failure.
Precisely. It sets an unrealistic expectation. And when reality inevitably challenges that expectation with a real conflict, the person who is hoping for goodness without pain usually just falters.
Because they haven't built the muscle.
They haven't built the internal structures, the moral muscle, as our sources call it, that you need to choose duty when it actively costs you something you desperately want to keep.
And this brings us right to the core argument for why cost matters so much.
Conflict reveals character.
Conflict reveals character. We have this deep-seated intuition that without the test of sacrifice, goodness is just untested. It's superficial, maybe even accidental.
Right.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Think about that moment of choice, when what is morally right directly conflicts with what is easy or pleasant.
The crucible.
That moment is the crucible. The decision you make under that pressure shows exactly what you really value, deep down. If all your choices have been easy ones, if you've never had to risk anything, we just don't know how deep your goodness goes.
It's a theoretical kindness.
It's a theoretical kindness, not a demonstrated integrity.
And this is where we can bring in something like virtue ethics, especially the tradition that comes from Aristotle. For him, moral goodness isn't just about following rules or getting good
It's
outcomes.
about developing character.
It's about developing practical wisdom and cultivating virtues through action, through habit. And the key part of virtue is knowing the right way to feel and act in a difficult situation. If you've never faced a difficult situation, you haven't exercised that wisdom.
So let's make that concrete.
Okay, let's illustrate this with what we call a cost of love, which is a perfect example of a non-dramatic but very real daily sacrifice. Imagine a couple navigating a really stressful time, say a job loss or a serious family illness. One partner comes home totally exhausted, they're short-tempered, and maybe they unfairly blame the other for some minor thing.
We've all been there.
Right. The other partner, who is also deeply stressed, has a choice. They can fire back with justified anger, right? Get that immediate relief of venting their own frustration.
Which is the easy choice, the egoistic one. Lash out, vent, prioritize your own emotional release.
Absolutely.
Right?
Or they can choose the moral path. They can choose patience, setting aside their own exhaustion and their own ego to provide calm and support.
And that costs something.
It costs them something invaluable in that moment. Their immediate self-relief, their ego, and a huge expenditure of very scarce emotional energy. The person who always insists on having the last word, or who only shows love when they feel happy and rested.
They're showing that their own comfort is the priority over the relationship.
Exactly. Real committed love demands this continuous small sacrifice of ego and self-interest. A purely cost-free goodness in that context looks more like, politeness to a stranger than devoted love for a partner.
That's a really powerful way to frame it. The source material also emphasizes the bigger context of injustice. I mean, if we lived in a perfectly fair society, maybe goodness would be effortless.
Maybe.
But when you have to stand up for the vulnerable, the very people who often lack the power to reward you or even protect you, your action has to be driven purely by duty, not by any possible personal gain.
And that is the definition of true sacrifice. It proves the motive is pure. It's not about you.
It moves morality from being this enjoyable side effect of a good life to being a commitment that can actually supersede your own self-preservation.
And a life lived in comfort, totally untouched by the needs of the suffering or the demands of justice, is a moral life lived in isolation. And moral isolation, the sources argue, leads to moral fragility.
Okay, now we need to balance this discussion a bit because the heroic narrative, the dramatic running into the burning building sacrifice, that can be really misleading.
It can.
We have to caution against this idea that goodness must be heroic or that you have to give up half your income for it to count. That just creates an impossibly high standard for people.
And it's not how most moral lives are lived.
Exactly. Most morally serious people live what the sources call ordinary lives. But these ordinary lives are built on everyday goodness that involves constant, low-level friction.
We're talking about consistency.
We're talking about consistency, being patient and kind to that irritating colleague day after day, doing your job honestly when shortcuts are available and no one would know, or consistently caring for your kids or your elderly parents, which is often the largest, longest-running sacrifice many people ever make.
And this raises a really important question. Maybe the stark divide we set up at the beginning, big dramatic sacrifice versus no sacrifice at all, is actually the wrong way to look at it.
What's a better way?
The reality is likely the contrast between big dramatic sacrifice and small, persistent daily sacrifices.
I see.
And if we zoom in on those daily actions, they absolutely involve unseen costs.
Yeah.
We have to define their costs precisely, though. Let's take patience with an annoying person.
Okay.
What does that cost you? It costs you your immediate peace of mind, your emotional equilibrium. It costs you scarce mental energy. It is an intentional decision to absorb negative input rather than deflect it or return it, all for the sake of a higher value like civility or compassion.
It's the cost of vigilance, isn't it? It costs energy to constantly monitor your own temper, your biases, your tendency to take shortcuts.
Exactly. The sacrifice is often the sacrifice of intention. Doing your job honestly means sacrificing the convenience of cutting corners, which is a small cost of time and effort. But more importantly, it requires sacrificing the intention to deceive or to relax your standards.
It's the subtle suppression of that lazy, selfish, or angry impulse.
Yes. The source material uses a powerful analogy here. We tend to only notice the moral earthquake, the massive, sudden sacrifice. But the bedrock of moral character is built through what you could call moral erosion.
Moral erosion. I like that.
It's the daily grind of choosing the marginally harder, marginally kinder path over and over again. And that's what wears down the tendency toward selfishness. That erosion, though it's quiet, is the ongoing sacrifice.
So almost any real engaged moral life involves some cost, even if it never gets a headline.
That's the argument, yes.
Okay, so now let's push this argument to its absolute limit. We have to address the thought experiment that the sources present, the extreme hypothetical of the perfectly lucky good life. This really helps us isolate the philosophical necessity of the cost itself.
Right, the thought experiment.
So imagine this, a person who exists in basically a utopia, a fair, wealthy society. They have a calm, generous, kind temperament that's just rooted in their genetics and their upbringing.
And critical.
Critically, their desires always align perfectly with morality. They genuinely want to serve others. They hate injustice. They have no internal pull toward greed or laziness. And because their society is so fair and they're so well adjusted, doing good never feels like a loss to them.
In fact, it always feels like the most fulfilling and enjoyable option. So in this life, there is no felt sacrifice.
Oh, yes.
This person acts perfectly morally every single day, but they never have to overcome any internal or external resistance.
Which brings us to the sharp philosophical question. Are they morally good or are they morally untested?
It's a tough one.
Well, I want to challenge the premise that they're untested. If you take a consequentialist view, that morality is just defined by outcomes, this person is a perfect moral agent.
You're right. From that perspective, they are.
They maximize happiness and minimize suffering. Their goodness is real because the result is good. Who cares if they struggled internally? Isn't the point of morality to create a better world? And haven't they done that flawlessly?
That is the crucial point of tension. While consequentialism would praise their actions, our sources argue that this perspective misses the component of moral merit.
Moral merit.
We might say this person is extremely fortunate and has a kindly disposition, but their goodness remains purely circumstantial. They're good because the environment and their own psychology make it easy.
So it's not really theirs.
In a way, think of it like a bank account. A person with no sacrifice is like someone who's never faced a financial emergency. Their account looks healthy, but we don't know if they have the necessary reserve capital, the integrity, the resilience to make a large, painful withdrawal when a crisis hits.
Whereas the person who struggles with temptation fights it and still chooses the good.
Is building that reserve capital. Their moral muscle has been exercised against resistance, making them stronger and more reliable.
So the goodness of the lucky person is fragile. If their society suddenly collapsed into chaos, or if a terrible personal tragedy warped their temperament,
their goodness might just vanish instantly, because it was never rooted in a hard-won commitment to duty. It was only rooted in circumstance.
It's like a plant in a greenhouse.
Precisely. It's like a plant that has only ever grown in a perfectly climate-controlled greenhouse. It looks robust, but it lacks the thick, storm-resistant root structure of a plant that has survived drought and high winds. Moral depth, the kind that survives real-world chaos, often only appears after we feel that painful pull of selfishness, the desire to quit, to hoard, to lie, and still manage to choose the good. That internal victory strengthens character.
And what about empathy?
That's another huge piece. If you have never felt the pain of sacrificing your comfort or your resources, how can you truly empathize with someone whose entire life is defined by deprivation or necessary sacrifice? The cost provides moral imagination. A life without cost is shallow in moral terms because it lacks the perspective gained through struggle.
Okay, we absolutely must pull back now because focusing so heavily on the necessity of cost can lead us straight into a really significant ethical trap.
A dangerous one.
We have to actively caution against the idea that more sacrifice always equals more goodness. We absolutely need to avoid the glorification of pain for its own sake.
Yes. This is so important.
If we make suffering the metric of virtue, we run into immediate negative consequences. And one of the most common is self-destruction and burnout.
Right.
Certain cultural or religious frameworks can sometimes teach people to just completely negate their own needs, to always prioritize others to the point of exhaustion. This is not a sustainable morality.
No, it leads directly to chronic resentment, to psychological burnout, and it often makes the person vulnerable to exploitation because they've been conditioned to negate their own value and their own boundaries.
It's toxic.
It is. A moral philosophy that celebrates endless self-abnegation is often toxic. The sources highlight that reckless self-sacrifice actually reduces your long-term capacity to help. If you run yourself into the ground trying to help everyone all at once, you won't be there to help anyone when a real crisis comes along 6 months from now.
So true moral maturity involves knowing that self-care, joy, rest, self-respect is actually a prerequisite for sustainable action.
It's part of the toolkit.
And then there's the other side of this, the psychological phenomenon of the martyr complex.
Ah, yes.
This is when people become attached to the image of themselves as a heroic sufferer. They might unconsciously seek out unnecessary or unwise sacrifices, not because the moral good demands it, but purely to reinforce their self-image as noble and virtuous.
The martyr complex is a form of moral vanity. The motivation shifts from serving the external moral good like justice or compassion to serving one's own internal narrative of heroism.
And that can be really damaging.
Very. They might refuse necessary help or exaggerate their suffering or even secretly resent the people they're helping because they're using their sacrifice as a bargaining chip for validation or moral superiority.
So we have to draw a really clear line.
We must establish a clear, nuanced distinction. The difference between meaningful sacrifice and needless self-damage. Meaningful sacrifice is giving something up for a real, important, external moral good. Needless self-damage is just choosing suffering to feel noble or to prove a point.
So the goal isn't to be miserable.
The goal is to be effective and principled. If you reject joy, rest, or essential self-care, believing that suffering is mandatory for goodness, you are subscribing to an unsustainable and ultimately a harmful ethical standard.
Okay, so let's try to unpack this and synthesize our findings now. We've moved through the fantasy of cost-free goodness, we've established why conflict matters for character, and we've cautioned against the trap of glorifying pain. So where does the real answer lie for someone trying to live a good life today?
It's the key question.
The conclusion from our sources seems to be that it isn't about constant suffering, but about the willingness, or maybe more accurately, the readiness to sacrifice when it truly matters.
Yes. You do not need to be in continuous pain to be moral.
But you need to be constantly prepared.
That concept of readiness completely changes the focus, doesn't it? It moves it from the action to the internal posture. Moral goodness requires this deep, pre-existing orientation of the heart.
What does that mean in practice?
It means that, without even being asked, you've prepared yourself to put your core values, justice, compassion, honesty, above your own comfort or financial gain or social advantage if they ever come into conflict.
So it's the if that matters.
That readiness is the quiet guarantee of your integrity. Even if the conflict never arises, even if you happen to live a relatively lucky life, your character is grounded because you know what you would do if the test came. This preparation, this deep orientation, is what proves the depth of your character.
It's not just preparing for virtue, it is the virtue.
It is, because it shows your commitment is foundational, not conditional.
And this readiness, it's not just theoretical. I mean, even if the sacrifices aren't huge and dramatic, this posture, it shows up in those smaller, steady choices we were talking about earlier.
It's manifested in the minor, continuous defeats of self-interest. Absolutely. Think about the person who consistently chooses the harder but kinder option. The person who gives back the extra change the cashier mistakenly gave them, even though nobody saw, and they could really use the cash.
That's a great, simple example.
That tiny act isn't heroic, but it proves that their internal priority system is set to honesty, even when convenience and self-interest are nudging them the other way.
So the final nuance for you, the listener, is this.
A moral life is ultimately one where your priorities ensure that when sacrifice is genuinely necessary for important values, for justice, for compassion, for honesty, you are both capable and willing to make that choice, even if it carries a significant cost.
The character is proven in the readiness to pay.
Exactly.
And this realization, it matters so intensely because we have to come back to the complexity of the world we actually live in. In reality, it is profoundly unlikely to live a morally serious life, a life engaged with the needs of others, with the demands of fairness, with deep relationships, without making some sacrifices.
Some sacrifices of your time, your comfort, your ego, or your money.
And if your goodness never costs you anything, the likelihood is really high that that goodness is either untested and fragile,
or it's just shallow. It suggests that the moral demands placed on you have never exceeded your immediate personal comfort zone. You've never been in a situation that forced you to change your plans or empty your wallet or endure social discomfort for the sake of a principle.
And you should think about what a life completely free of sacrifice actually suggests. The analysis points to three main possibilities.
The first is extraordinary, rare privilege, where the world just bends to your needs.
The second is deliberate avoidance, where you actively steer clear of any situation that might challenge your comfort or your resources.
And the third is, well, isolation, where you have very little contact with the real, messy moral demands of the world outside your personal bubble.
And in all of those scenarios, privilege, avoidance, or isolation, the moral character remains underdeveloped. It remains untested.
We move away from the idea that the person is necessarily bad. We don't have to judge them like that. But we conclude that they lack the foundation required for true virtue.
So they might be nice.
They might be very nice, agreeable, pleasant, easy to be around, but whether they are truly good when integrity is on the line, that remains an open, unproven question until the moment the cost is assessed and the sacrifice is required.
They lack moral mettle.
That's a good way to put it.
And the cost of avoiding sacrifice, therefore, isn't just that you lose a shot at being a hero, it's the potential loss of your own integrity when it finally matters most. So this deep dive has really shown us that the ideal of a purely cost-free moral life is, for almost all of us living in this messy world, a fantasy. True moral goodness, whether it's revealed in a single heroic moment or in the steady, quiet choices of daily life, requires the readiness to pay a price.
It requires putting value ahead of convenience. We have to move past this simple binary of dramatic heroism versus simple indifference. Morality is so often found in those subtle, profound acts of daily resistance.
Staying patient and kind when it's far easier to be indifferent or angry. Being honest when a little lie would elegantly protect your image. Or giving up something small but desired, your time, your energy, so that someone else can have enough. That demonstration of priority, that shift from self-focus to principle focus, that is the definition of the cost.
As you move forward today and think about the insights we've uncovered, we want to leave you with a few provocative questions. And you should think about them not as judgments, but as practical tools for assessing your own moral landscape, the strength of your own roots.
So, first, where in your life right now are you genuinely making sacrifices for something you truly value? Try to identify the genuine, maybe even painful costs you're currently paying, the investment you are making in your principles.
Second, and this one requires a bit more reflection, where are you actively or maybe passively avoiding sacrifice, even though you have a quiet sense that a moral or relational obligation exists? Where is your comfort currently winning out against your conscience? And finally, what kind of meaningful sacrifices, we mean not unnecessary self-damage, but genuine costs, are you willing to prepare to make to develop the kind of deep, resilient character you want to be known for? That readiness, that intentional preparation for duty, is the quiet backbone of a moral life.